Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, September the 10th, 2024. So today it's a big debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and everyone is excited about it. It's supposedly going to decide the presidential election. I mean, it probably won't, but certainly there is a lot of excitement. And I will talk about the debate, but probably quite briefly. And we've also got Allan Lichtman, the originator or one of the originators of these 13 keys to the presidency. I think he's now said that the Democrats are going to win in November, that Harris is going to be elected. And I wanted to quickly look at his chart, actually. I wanted to look at his horoscope. I don't have his time of birth because he's put a lot on the line now by saying that the Democrats are going to win. I think he is a Democrat himself. And, I wonder about that. I wonder what's going on in his chart at the moment, because getting a prediction wrong is really bad. It doesn't feel good. I know myself, obviously being an astrologer, that's part of the experience of this profession, getting things wrong. That's always a risk, isn't it? So, how's Allan Lichtman going to be feeling in the days following the presidential election in November? So, yeah, that's something I wanted to consider. But I also wanted to look at this connection between the Democrats and the Republicans and Jupiter and Saturn. So, recently I was reminded by one of the commenters on my channel, Linda Calder. And Linda Calder mentioned that there is this book called by Barbara Waters called Astrology and a Judgment of Events. And Barbara Waters in this book took the view that Jupiter rules the Republicans and Saturn rules the Democrats. So you could say that Republicans are from Jupiter and Democrats are from Saturn. And if that is the case, then you would expect during elections when Republicans win for Jupiter to be stronger than Saturn and vice versa. So I do want to look at that relationship to see if, in terms of past elections, whether there's any evidence that that actually works and whether that can tell us anything about the 2024 election. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, September the 10th, 2024. And just a reminder that if you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to just like it. And if you like the video and you're not subscribed, I would be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And so let's look at what's happening today. In fact, not a lot is happening. The moon is in Sagittarius. There you can see that there's the moon in Sagittarius, and it's making a sextile to Venus, and it's sort of making a square to Saturn. I mean, these positions are set for noon in New York. So that moon square Saturn is happening really quite late in the day. And you could say that the moon sextile Venus is the dominant aspect today. And really, that is pretty much it. I mean, it's quite a nice aspect, moon sextile Venus. Moon does work pretty well in Sagittarius. It's quite a fun place for the moon to be. A lot of action, a lot of activity, and it is sextile. It's sextile Venus. That means that we can get on with people. It's good in terms of relating, especially as Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn. So it's actually quite a strong Venus. And strong Saturn, actually, because Venus and Saturn, they help each other with this mutual reception by exaltation, because Venus is in Libra, which is the sign in which Saturn is exalted in, and Saturn is in Pisces, which is the sign in which Venus is exalted in. So overall, I would have said that for most of the day, things should be fairly pleasant, though at the end of the day, as the moon starts making a square to Saturn, things might be more difficult. That's particularly if you're in the Americas. So, for example, by this evening in the Americas, the moon is starting to make that square to Saturn. And so that could put a damper on proceedings, but maybe not such a damper, simply because the moon still has a sextile relationship to Venus, and Venus is, as I just said, in mutual reception by exaltation to Saturn. So, broadly speaking, that is the picture today. It's fairly straightforward. Now, turning to the heliocentric view, so putting the Sun at the center of the solar system where it should be, we still have Venus opposition Mars, and we have Venus moving towards an opposition of Uranus. Now, must emphasize these are heliocentric positions. When I say Venus opposition Mars, I really do try to make it clear that is a heliocentric position. Sometimes people think when I'm saying Venus opposition Mars, but there's no Venus-Mars opposition. From a geocentric point of view, there is no Venus-Mars opposition. But from a heliocentric perspective, there certainly is. And I think that this Venus-Mars opposition continues to be important, and now it's tied up with Uranus. And so if you look at it, you've got a heliocentric Mars-Uranus conjunction, and Venus is opposition the Mars-Uranus conjunction. And so that does stir things up. And I suppose we have to remember that we have got this debate this evening between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and you've got Venus, a female planet, opposition Mars, a male planet, and perhaps there could be fireworks, maybe, and Venus is opposition to Mars-Uranus midpoint, so we perhaps get the idea there of trouble, fireworks, drama. So that's something perhaps we need to be aware of. And I suppose you could say, well, you might get the symbolism of maybe women getting themselves into trouble. I don't know if I want to take that analogy too far in terms of the debate, because in terms of the debate, we do actually have a mutual reception between Venus and Saturn. Venus is a universal significator of women, and Saturn represents arguably the Democratic Party. And so perhaps that means that Kamala Harris will have some kind of protection during the debate, maybe. But aside from the debate, Venus opposition Mars, Venus opposition Uranus does indicate that certain relationships could be a little bit unstable, and we shouldn't assume that relationships are going to go to plan, and there may be plenty of things going on to sort of upset the harmony. And that opposition between Venus opposition Mars, Venus opposition Uranus does really dominate proceedings, though just a reminder that the Earth is still pretty close to Saturn. There's that Earth-Saturn conjunction, which, of course, by definition, an Earth-Saturn conjunction is a Sun-Saturn opposition. It is separating, but still with this Earth conjunct Saturn, I think that there's a sense in which things might not be running fully to plan. There might be frustrations, things getting in our way, and it may perhaps be difficult at times to assert ourselves, or if we do want things done, it just may take a huge amount of work. So that's a broad heliocentric picture. So I now want to turn to the 12 signs. Now, there isn't much going on astrologically today, and I'm kind of hoping that that's sort of reflected in my readings for the 12 signs. So maybe my readings for the 12 signs are perhaps going to be a little shorter than usual. Maybe, I don't know. It's always difficult to predict these things. Okay, so these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, September the 10th, 2024. Aries. Aries, I think at the moment you seem to be pretty confident. You feel that you know what you're doing and that you know what you're talking about. And in terms of your whole demeanour, there may be a sense of authority. I mean, quiet authority. You don't have to, throw your weight around. You know what's right, you know what's wrong, and at the same time, I think in most cases you're going to be fairly likable. And I think you're helped by the fact that the moon is in Sagittarius. So the moon in Sagittarius, it's in a fire sign. Aries is a fire sign. You feel that there are opportunities out there. I don't think you feel that you're being particularly pressurized, and at the same time you do have a fundamental sense of grounding. You know where you need to be, and you know what you need to do, and I don't think that you're going to do anything that is particularly dangerous or destabilizing. So by and large, that is the broad picture. Now, it's probably a bad idea to underestimate other people. If there are any issues today, it is quite possibly going to be about other people. We looked at the heliocentric picture, and there continues to be a heliocentric Venus opposition Mars. And that heliocentric opposition, Venus opposition Mars, might indicate that certain people could spoil the day if you let them. I mean, it shouldn't happen, because I think overall today looks quite relaxing, really. But just to stick to people don't feel that you have to spend a long time in the presence of any one person, particularly if you don't like this person. So perhaps you need to ask yourself, who could spoil your day? I mean, there are people that could, or it may actually be that you could spoil their day, or indeed that you could spoil each other's day. So choose your company carefully. I think that is going to be very important, and think about what you need to do to give yourself freedom. If you're feeling free, and if you feel that nothing is getting in your way, then you're going to be happy, and you're going to relate better to other people, and other people are going to relate better to you. And that, I think, is the way you should proceed over the course of the day. And I think you have to make an allowance for other people, but sometimes the best way of making an allowance for other people is actually to just stay out of their way. Taurus. Well, Taurus, it's true that Venus is in a good position. I mean, Venus has been in a good position for some time. Venus is your ruler, and Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn by exaltation. So this mutual reception between Venus and Saturn by exaltation has been going on for some time. It's not just about today, but maybe right now you can particularly benefit from it. So what this mutual reception between Venus and Saturn by exaltation means is that probably you can benefit with a serious approach, and by taking other people seriously. That's the way to go. And if you take other people seriously, they will take you seriously. Especially today when you have got the moon making a sextile to Venus. So with that moon sextile Venus, you're able to focus on the things that really matter. You're not really going to be into trivia. I mean, Taurians tend not to be into trivia. I mean, they can be serious and grounded, and they know what's important. And I think that you will be taking yourself seriously, and I think that people will be listening to you. And at the same time, yeah, you'll give the impression of being someone that can be trusted and who does know what they're talking about. Though we shouldn't forget that heliocentrically, Venus is opposition Mars and opposition Uranus. And this heliocentric opposition, it might be troublesome in the wrong situation. So if you go to places where you shouldn't be, or you feel uncomfortable, or you're with people who make you feel uncomfortable, then there could be problems. You could react quite negatively. You might even have a short temper with Venus on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So, make sure that you do choose your company carefully. I mean, I said the same thing or something very similar to Aries, because this Venus-Mars opposition does affect Aries as well, because Mars rules Aries, so Mars represents Aries, but in your case, Taurus, Venus represents you. And perhaps you need to make an effort to work out what's going to happen next, to try to imagine how things might proceed. You might think you're going into a situation that looks straightforward, but it might turn out to be very, very complicated. Or you might get involved with technology, Venus opposition to Mars, heliocentric Venus opposition Mars and Uranus might encourage you to get involved in sort of technology, which doesn't necessarily work to plan. And so there could be a lot of annoyances there. But, this shouldn't take away from the fact that the moon is sextile Venus. It's a very nice aspect. And so provided you make the right choices, I think today should be fine. But if you just make the wrong choices, and if you're inclined to take risks, then the day might not turn out as planned, and it might just suddenly become very complicated very quickly. Gemini. It's a day, Gemini, when it's probably a good idea to take into account other people. I mean, that is because the moon is moving through Sagittarius, which is, of course, your opposite sign. And so when the moon is moving through Sagittarius, it is a time, Gemini, when you can be quite focused on other people. Even if you don't want to be focused on other people, you still have to accept that they are there and you need to take them into account. If you don't take them into account, then things might be troublesome, things might be slower than expected, and there might be frustrations. On the other hand, if you take people into account, with the moon is making a sextile to Venus, I think it's a very different picture. I mean, other people at the moment can be a real benefit in your life. And, Venus is in Libra. Venus is strongly placed in Libra because it's in mutual reception by exaltation to Saturn. And so with Venus in Libra, it's an air sign. And, Gemini is an air sign. So that means that you're able to express yourself and be creative with other people. And, Moon sextile Venus with Venus in Libra can be about close relationships. It can be about romance. It can be about being able to get close to people, provided things are done in the right way. It's not about being heavily emotional. Too much emotion is not going to get you anywhere today. I mean, most Geminis are pretty wary of overly emotional situations, and you're right to be wary. But if everything is light and the emphasis is on creativity and enjoyment, then I think the day should very much go, should go very well. Though a few Geminis may feel that things aren't good enough, that you have to push things to get results, and you won't be entirely satisfied unless you know for sure that you're in control. Now, I don't think all Geminis are going to feel like this, but if you are the kind of Gemini that is very focused on power and control, then I think you are going to want to be in control, and you may not like it if other people tell you what to do. Now, I'm suggesting that you need to try to be relaxed here. Just because someone tells you what to do or makes a suggestion doesn't mean that you have to feel threatened by it. I think you need to be a little more relaxed, more able to sort of go with the flow. So probably in most cases, your desire to assert yourself in a dramatic way should probably be moderated, or perhaps put on ice for another day. But I suppose it depends what you're doing. I suppose if you're in a business environment, or you're in an environment which is just competitive because that's the way it is, then perhaps that's a different picture. In that case, maybe you can get your way but you have to be clever. Just because you want something doesn't mean you need to get it right now. You can get it at some stage, but you may have to be a little bit manipulative and also sensitive. I mean, sensitivity does matter, and perhaps that's a lot of what today is about, because, the moon is in your opposite sign. You've got to, at a certain level, be sensitive to what other people are like, and be sensitive to other people's sensibilities and priorities. Cancer, the moon is sextile Venus. I mean, that is the main aspect today. In fact, you could say that moon sextile Venus is really the only aspect today. And from a Cancerian perspective, moon sextile Venus is fortunate, because the moon obviously has a special relationship with Cancer. Venus is very strong because Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn, and so moon sextile Venus means that at some level you do feel relaxed. You can be yourself, you can be yourself with other people, and you don't have to go out of your way. It's quite unnecessary to go out of your way. It's about finding somewhere where you feel comfortable, and if there is pressure for you to go off the beaten path, to perhaps do something different that you hadn't fully planned for, then I think I would suggest that you resist the pressure. You've got things you want to do in your own space. The concept of harmony today, I think, is actually very important to you. You have a sense of what is harmonious. You also have a sense, Cancer, today, of what is not harmonious, what is perhaps an insult to your sensibilities, and that is perhaps how you should proceed. If you feel comfortable, then just go for it. If something makes you uncomfortable, then stay away from it. And if you trust your Cancerian feelings, then I do think that, everything should be fine. Now, towards the end of the day, and this is particularly if you're in the Americas, to a lesser extent in Europe, but in Europe it would be really, I'm talking really towards the end of the day, almost towards midnight. Asia, Australia, New Zealand don't have to worry about it, but there is a square aspect between the moon and Saturn. So what we have is the main aspect today, moon sextile Venus. Then there's a square between moon and Saturn, and that square between moon and Saturn, I don't know what you're doing this evening, but it may be a little bit, I won't say destabilizing, but I think it's more about you being aware perhaps that perhaps you and another person aren't entirely on the same wavelength. And so if you're out and about this evening, that might be an awareness that you have. But at the same time, I think there's also a sense in which you can do something about it. Just because you're not on someone's wavelength doesn't mean that you can't get on with someone. You can perhaps understand someone. And I think you're helped by the fact that Venus and Saturn are in mutual reception by exaltation. So moon sextiles Venus, then it makes a square to Saturn. So although Venus and Saturn have a supposedly disharmonious relationship, being sort of in quincunx 150 degrees apart, and I think that aspect would probably become exact tomorrow, it's because they're in mutual reception that you actually have a chance here to get on with people who on a surface level you don't get on with. And I think that is a possibility. And I suppose that depends what you're doing this evening, because I think the Moon Square Saturn aspect is more about America, more about this evening. But you do have that possibility. So, try to be very mature when dealing with other people, especially if you feel that you don't entirely get on with them. Leo, you do continue to have quite a lot to say for yourself. That has been a trend for some time. You've got a certain view of the world, and it's a view of the world that you want to tell people about, and you can articulate yourself, I think, with great force. But what you don't want to do is use too much force, because I think that would be unnecessary, and I think you'd be, going against, the demands of the day. Today is, or should be, a day when you can enjoy yourself and you can actually tune into your creativity. The moon is in Sagittarius. The moon, it's nice in Sagittarius, especially if you're a Leo. Leo, Sagittarius is a fire sign, and when the moon is in Sagittarius, you have a chance to be yourself. And in terms of how you express yourself, yes, you could express yourself in a way that is a little bit hasty, a little bit aggressive, but that's unnecessary. What you should be expressing is just your joy of being alive and doing something you like. That's what really matters. Doing something that you like, that you're really comfortable with. And so if you have got a choice of, perhaps different activities, and try to do the activities that you enjoy doing. Activities which seem boring and you don't really want to do, and if they're not urgent, I do think they can probably be postponed a couple of days. Maybe you should wait until the moon goes into Capricorn. That might be a better time to do it. The moon does not go into Capricorn. I think moon will go into Capricorn off the top of my head on Thursday or something like that, sort of in midweek and beyond. So for the moment, just really do what makes you feel comfortable, and also that's going to help in terms of getting on with other people. If you're feeling comfortable, then other people are going to feel comfortable with you. And we've got the moon in Sagittarius. It's making a sextile to Venus, so you're going to feel, I think, a certain rapport with other people, provided it's all on your terms, provided there's no pressure, no one's telling you what to do, you're not telling them what to do. And so, again, going back to how you communicate, it's not a good idea to attack people or to pressurize people. People shouldn't have to be pressurized. Either they follow your lead naturally or they do something else, and it really shouldn't worry you, because Leo, the person that really matters is you yourself. I mean, it matters all the time, but I think today you're the important person, and if you can express yourself freely, then you're doing the right thing. Virgo, you are feeling that things could be a little bit better. And I don't actually mean that in a negative sense. I think it's actually quite good that you feel that things could be better, because you are getting the stimulus to create constructive change. And so don't be satisfied with the way things are. It's really quite unnecessary. And if you feel that there is a gap between what you want and the way the world is, there may be ways in which you can close that gap, and in which you can do something to really shake things up and to bring about some kind of transformation. Because at the moment you are quite a transformative person, and your ability to transform is very fundamental. You understand, I think, where the weak points lie. It's easy to focus on trivia, on the superficial features of something, but not you, not at the moment. You're able to look at things from the base, from the absolute bottom, from the roots, and you understand that if you can change the roots of something, then you can change something's entire nature. So that might be something that you're thinking about. But the question is, how much destruction and disruption do you need to cause? And I suspect the answer is not very much. Perhaps you don't have to cause any disruption at all, because the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and that sextile to Venus gives you a certain social facility. You can get your way without upsetting anyone, and perhaps you can explain yourself very well. You can say, this is why you need to do it, and you don't have a choice. And at the same time, you can use words and mannerisms which don't upset people, which don't give rise to any suspicion. And so you are powerful, but I think that your power in many respects is going to be under the surface. And this moon sextile Venus, I think, is useful also in terms of relationships and perhaps patching them up. I mean, I'm not saying anything's wrong with relationships. It's just that you've had this Sun opposition Saturn aspect. It's breaking up the Sun opposition Saturn. But the thing about this Sun Saturn opposition, it was across, is across the main axis of your solar chart. The Sun in Virgo, Saturn in Pisces, and it may be suggestive of someone who is holding you up, or someone you don't understand, or someone you don't appreciate. But with the moon sextile Venus, and Venus being in mutual reception to Saturn, you actually have a chance to make things whole, perhaps. So if there have been recent disagreements, you can actually take action to stabilize the situation. Now, those disagreements may not go away, but those disagreements just may not be as important as they used to be. And this moon in Sagittarius, it does make it's making a T-square. Now, that T-square is probably going to be more exact tomorrow, but it's still starting to form. So what you've got is you've got Sun opposition Saturn, and you've got the moon making a sextile to the Sun and making the moon making a square to the Sun and making a square to Saturn, and the moon being in a very grounded but important part of your chart. And so if there have been disagreements, it seems that right now you have the ability to really ground the situation and make other people feel comfortable. And certainly, it's not certainly, but it could be at the very least about de-escalation, about things becoming calmer, and perhaps reminding yourself and other people about what is important and what is just merely trivial. And very often arguments and disagreements can be about trivial things, and the disagreements don't go away, but the significance of those disagreements can be reduced, and that's, I think, something that you can do today. Libra. So Venus is in Libra, it's in your sign, and Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn by exaltation, and that's been a situation that's been going on for some time. But we also have the moon sextile Venus, and so overall, Libra, I do think that it should be quite a good day when things should really start to flow. You might feel a sense of your ability to express yourself, and at the same time, being able to understand what makes other people tick. So I think you're going to be quite sensitive in that sense, and I think that your communication skills, they're going to be really helped by the fact that the moon is in Sagittarius, and of course the moon is in Sagittarius sextile Venus. So I think that you can communicate in a way that is quite dynamic and exciting, and I think you will know how to get people's attention. And because Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn, I think that you will have a certain amount of gravitas, and again, that really is going to help. But I think it's important to know when you've taken something too far, or rather to perhaps know when to stop. There's a certain tendency here to perhaps prolong things for longer than they should be prolonged for. And that may relate to the fact that the moon, having made a sextile to Venus, it does go on to make a square of Saturn. I'm not saying that moon square Saturn need be particularly problematic, but I think perhaps the message here is sort of to quit while you're ahead. So if today you think that things are starting to go your way, things are moving, and you can feel the flow, enjoy the moment, but also be aware that nothing lasts forever, and be aware of the way cycles can change. And so when you're at the top of your game, that's perhaps a time to start heading for the exits. So that would be something you need to consider. Also, from a heliocentric perspective, Venus is opposition Mars and Venus is opposition the Mars-Uranus midpoint. Now, I think it's more important that Venus is in Libra, in geocentrically, Moon is sextile Venus, and that looks nice, but just you might possibly pick up on that heliocentric picture. And perhaps with Venus opposition Mars, there is a reminder, and it's not just Venus opposition Mars, it's Venus opposition Uranus heliocentrically, and Venus is opposition the Mars-Uranus midpoint heliocentrically. With that, there's just a fundamental awareness that whatever things seem to be like on the surface, there is a fundamental incompatibility somewhere along the way. It may be a person or it may be a situation that fundamentally you don't get on with. Sure, you can be nice to them. You're going to be quite fluent with your words overall, but you can't be friends with everyone, and you need to be aware of this incompatibility. Now, this incompatibility might be temporary, but it's still something that you do have to be aware of, and perhaps that's why it's important to keep moving. So you can interact with someone you don't get on with very well, but only up to a point. And that's what I mean by taking things too far. If you stay talking to someone for too long, then perhaps what's going to happen is that the collective is going to start to cut in. So when I say collective, I mean when one looks at the heliocentric picture rather than the geocentric picture. In other words, heliocentrically, when I was looking at the planets from a position from a perspective of the sun, this is more general. It's not so personal, and as ordinary human beings, we might not be affected by this Venus opposition Saturn, provided we don't linger. But if you linger in the same place with the same person for too long, then you might be starting to bring down that collective energy, and that collective energy is difficult with Venus opposition Mars-Uranus. So that's something you have to be careful of, and perhaps you should just be a typical Libra. Typical Librans like to float on the surface, but not getting too deep. But at the same time, you need a certain amount of gravitas for the moment. When you're in one place, you are serious, you get taken seriously, but you move on. You don't want to linger. But if you do stay in one place, then for a long time, perhaps that's when the problems start. But really, there shouldn't be a problem. If you just keep it relatively light and don't tempt fate, and particularly if things are starting to go well, when things are going well, when things are flowing, that should be the moment that you as I've said, but you should really quit while you're ahead. So that's today. I think it really can be a very good day, but it's just important that you don't push things too far. Scorpio, you have something about you that people will take seriously. They will regard you as a serious person who has got something serious to say, and in most cases they will be happy to listen to you. If you've got something to say, it may be that you don't have anything to say, but if you feel you need to be heard and that your opinions matter, then don't be afraid. You can say what's on your mind. And I don't know what your main focus of interest is. with the moon in Sagittarius, I suppose it could in certain situations be money. And if money is an issue, then I think that you have the opportunity to get to grips with it and to discuss money and plan your whatever your financial business might be. You're able to make good plans, and I think you can also be quite imaginative without being speculative with moon in Sagittarius. So you can sort of perhaps imagine what should be done with money, but at the same time, you're a sensible Scorpio, you're not going to take any risks. So you can see money in different ways, and perhaps in certain situations your attitude to money might change, and you might have a more constructive attitude towards money, and also towards perhaps ongoing financial issues that perhaps had seemed a bit of a negative, but when you look at them again, you can start to perhaps see opportunities. Now, Venus and Mars, heliocentrically, are in opposition aspect today. But they have been in opposition aspect for the last couple of days, but I think it's perhaps quite strong at the moment because Venus is opposition Mars and it's opposition Uranus. In fact, Venus is opposition the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And that may indicate that certain relationships need to be treated with a certain amount of caution. You have a certain attitude, you have a particular view, and not everyone agrees with it. You can't expect everyone to agree with it, and so you perhaps have to be careful what you say and who you say it to, because certain people might not be appreciative, and they might still be keeping their feelings to themselves, but just because someone says nothing doesn't mean they aren't bothered. And so if you say something out of turn or something that is a bit risque or provocative, you might feel that nothing's happened, but something actually might have happened. So, if in doubt, Scorpio, then it might be best to just keep your opinions to yourself. Though, having said that, there is something about you that is quite authoritative, and if you're in an area where your authority is going to be appreciated, where you understand how things are working, when you understand what people should be doing, what people should not be doing, then you're going to be a very useful person to have around. But ideally, that would be a situation where the nature of relationships is clear and obvious. In that case, you can be authoritative because you understand what relationships are actually about. I mean, for example, it might be a relationship which is based around a joint task, or it might be a business relationship or something. You're working with someone, but where there is a specific task that needs to be done. It's when you've got more complicated relationships which have many different dimensions, that's perhaps where there might be a bit of trouble. So do be aware of the different relationships around you and how different relationships require a different approach. So that's pretty much today. I'm not saying that today need be particularly dramatic, and I suppose it's just a good idea to consider what is required at a particular time, and don't give anything more than you have to. And if you feel that a relationship is complicated, or it has got many dimensions, then you need to be careful, and you need to be careful what you say. So, that's Tuesday. I think you should be able to get through it okay. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, you've still got the moon moving through your sign, and the moon is making a sextile to Venus. And I think that moon sextile Venus for you, a Sagittarius, looks pretty fortunate. It does allow you to express yourself, and in terms of other people, I think that you can get on with a wide range of people. I don't think you're going to be closed-minded, and you'll be open to new possibilities, and I think you're going to be interested in what other people have to say, and I think you'll know how to respond. And I think that's always important, isn't it? When you're told something, it's always a good idea to show some enthusiasm. People want enthusiasm. They want their egos to be massaged, and you're indeed going to be able to show some enthusiasm and show that you really care about another person's interests. Okay, you might feel that it's a bit too much if someone is talking too much, but you can handle it. It's fine, and at the same time, you can bring to bear your own interests. I mean, you clearly have things that you're interested in, that you do want to express. Now, possibly the most important event from a Sagittarian perspective, it may be more about tomorrow, sort of late today, it depends on your time zone, but we have got the Sun is opposition Saturn. So the Sun was opposition Saturn, exactly opposition Saturn over the weekend, but this Sun opposition Saturn is still around, and what's happening is that the moon is making a square to the Sun, and the moon is making a square to Saturn. So that means we've got a T-square forming. So, and the moon is on the T. So when you've got a T-square, you look at the planet on the T, the planet that is making the square to the opposition planets, as perhaps some kind of answer, some kind of solution. And so Sun opposition Saturn may indicate a conflict. It may be a conflict between people. It may be a conflict in terms of your own priorities, that you're being pushed in two directions. And I suppose in certain cases it can be a psychological conflict, perhaps relating to the past and your understanding of the past, and maybe your understanding of your parents. Even if your parents are long dead, there's still some kind of conflict there. And the moon is the answer. And the moon, being in Sagittarius, late today or tomorrow, may provide you with the answer. It's a moment perhaps of realization. It's not something you have to work on. You don't have to tune into your feelings. It just happens. You suddenly get an insight into a conflict, and it all makes sense. And you kind of rise above the conflict, and you see it for what it is. And it may be that you'd realize that the conflict can never be solved, but it doesn't matter. That things can be in conflict perhaps forever. And perhaps with that permanent conflict, there's a certain sense of dynamism, and it sort of makes you actually feel that you're alive. So, conflict does have negative connotations, but perhaps with that T-square, that moon in Sagittarius making the square to Sun, making the square to Saturn, and making an opposition to Jupiter as well, but it perhaps allows you to see something in a completely different way. And what's what seemed to be a problem, perhaps a problem that could never be solved, may actually be for you the way forward, and it might just actually give you a great sense of life and just being in an exciting world. And perhaps we need conflict. Without conflict, things are quite boring in some respects. Capricorn, moon's still in Sagittarius. Okay, the moon started moving into Sagittarius yesterday. It's still there. It's right in the middle of Sagittarius. And so I think that the moon in Sagittarius might incline you to feel that you don't want to be in the center of things, that it might be best if you're kind of on the periphery. That might be where you feel most comfortable, and let things develop at their own pace, and perhaps let other people take the strain. Though the moon in Sagittarius does make a sextile to Venus, and I think that sextile to Venus is potentially quite useful. Venus is in Libra. So Venus is in Libra, which is a high-profile sign in your chart. Also, Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation to Saturn. So Saturn is your ruler. So Venus and Saturn have this relationship to each other, which is intensified and enhanced by the fact that the moon is sextile Venus. And so, although your inclination might be to not do much, or at least to look at things from afar, that doesn't mean to say that you can't have an impact. And I think that you can do some deep thinking, and if you're trying to be successful in any particular area, you can define success however you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be about career. If you're trying to be successful, you can actually move things on, but move things on in a way that maybe isn't being noticed. It's something quiet. You're doing it in your own way. Though perhaps with moon sextile Venus, there may be people you can talk to in a sort of a low-profile way. It's not that you necessarily have to be discussing important issues, but what you're doing is you're keeping lines of communication open, and in that way you are actually moving forward with your ambitions. So there is plenty to do, but it just doesn't have to be done in an overt way. And I think that you should avoid situations that are difficult and conflict laden. It's not a time for trying to deal with major conflicts. Maybe there are no conflicts to worry about, but that's not the right approach. I think there might have been recent conflicts suggested by the fact that the Sun is opposition Saturn. So this Sun opposition Saturn, it was exact over the weekend. The Sun and Saturn are still in opposition, but it is starting to weaken. But the Moon is making a square to Sun and a square to Saturn, and that does indicate that you can make conflicts better, but not through anything direct. It's just that you can quietly do things in your own way, or perhaps with the help of another person, but it's all very low profile, to quieten things down. And it might actually be a good day for diplomacy, quiet diplomacy. So you don't have to be a world leader to be a diplomat. Diplomacy takes place everywhere at all levels. Diplomacy takes place within the family. So perhaps in your quiet way, you might sort of be able to tune into your diplomatic skills. Aquarius. Aquarius, you, I think, are quite sociable at the moment. I mean, I think you should be quite sociable at the moment with the moon in Sagittarius. You, I think, have a certain sympathy for other people and a way to get on with them. And at the same time, you seem to understand that you need to adopt the right approach. You know, people do have their limits, and I think you understand those limits. And yeah, you want to be sociable, and I think that in most cases you'll come over as an exciting person, as someone who can stir things up, and also someone who can be quite bold in terms of what you say. I mean, there is a boldness here, and also a kind of a simplicity. You don't want things to be complicated, and if there's something you want or you feel that something needs to happen, then Aquarius, I think you can just say it as it is. You just say what's on your mind, and you're quite clear about it, and people understand you, and that just makes things so simple. And you're helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Venus, and so with moon sextile Venus, you can say things that are simple, but which underlying it there is a more complex idea. Perhaps it's an idea that is very personal to yourself. You're not going to tell people about this idea, but you're just going to tell people about one aspect of this idea, or perhaps the broad theme of the idea. You know, you tell people that it might be a good idea to do something, and they say fine. They're not really thinking about why you want them to do something. That's for you. You can perhaps keep that to yourself. So in that sense, perhaps you can pursue an agenda without having to discuss the agenda. So that may actually give you a certain amount of power. And I suppose it's about not asking too many questions. Now, one aspect that I was talking about quite recently is this Sun opposition Saturn, and this aspect, Sun opposition Saturn, was exact over the weekend, and the Sun opposition Saturn aspect it's now starting to weaken, but I would have said it's still very operational. And one way of looking at Sun opposition Saturn from an Aquarian view is about you and someone else being at loggerheads, because Saturn rules Aquarius, the Sun rules Leo, your opposite sign. So Sun opposition Saturn is about you and someone else potentially being at loggerheads, or having disagreements, or having certain incompatibilities. And the moon is starting to square that opposition. So the moon in Sagittarius is square the Sun, and it's square Saturn. Now that square might not happen until early tomorrow, might be this evening, tomorrow, depends on your time zone. But at some stage, there will be an exact T-square when that opposition really comes into play. And it may be that you have a way to resolve an opposition, to resolve the opposition. And that opposition, that resolution could take different forms. So if, for example, you have just realized that you can't stand someone, and you really can't stand someone, but they have in the past played an important part in your life, but you somehow feel a sense that something is missing, then the solution would be to perhaps get involved in your social life, to forget about the person you can't stand and meet other people, and perhaps even meet some replacements. So that's one way of viewing it. Another way of seeing the moon in Sagittarius would be about you having hopes and wishes for the future, You hope that things can happen in a particular way, you wish that they would happen in a way, and it's in a particular way, and so that might allow you to look at things in a different way. And so perhaps when you look at a conflict in your life, how you and someone else are not getting on with each other, and perhaps you've just been too focused on it. You've just been too focused on the conflict, and you've never bothered to ask yourself, what actually do you want? And that might be the question. What do you wish for in terms of another person? Okay, you might wish for them to go away, but you might also wish for the relationship to change in some way. And I think with that T-square, you may see the opportunity here to change a relationship into something else, to have a new dimension to it. And you have to be optimistic. But I think you can be optimistic, and you are helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Venus as well. So I think with the right approach today, I think that conflicts can be resolved, at least to your satisfaction, not necessarily to another person's satisfaction, but to your satisfaction. And I think that you will start to see what is available, certainly in a social sense. Pisces, I think that you are quite focused on the future at the moment and all the things that you would like to happen. And at the same time, you're very aware, I think, about what is in your way, what is stopping you from achieving some of your ambitions. And, we can see this from the Sun opposition Saturn. I've talked about the Sun opposition Saturn. I'll try not to talk about it again, but this aspect, Sun in Virgo opposition Saturn in Pisces, which does have an impact on you. Saturn is in Pisces, Sun is in your opposite sign of Virgo. So this opposition is something of a problem, or I think it has been something of a problem, but I think you also see a resolution, and the resolution can be perhaps symbolized as the moon in Sagittarius. So the moon in Sagittarius is in a high profile sector of your chart, and it's square the Sun in Virgo. I mean, this square might be more about tomorrow, and it's square Saturn. So that moon hitting the opposition could be late today, could be tomorrow, and it is a way of seeing a way to resolve something. And it may be that the best way to resolve something is to be completely focused on what you want. And that is, especially the case if you've got a problem relationship, or a relationship that is feels as if it might be holding you back. You just need to perhaps stop thinking about the relationship itself, but just asking, what do you want? What are your ambitions? And those ambitions might actually have nothing to do with the relationship. Or it may actually be the case that there is a conflict between you and another person, which is, in a way, quite constructive. It's encouraging you perhaps to think for yourself. It's encouraging you to take action. And with this moon in Sagittarius, perhaps that is the action you can take. And that moon in Sagittarius, it makes a sextile to Venus, and Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn, and Saturn is in your sign. And so that allows you to tap into your own energy and power. And I think that you're going to start to realize what you are capable of doing. And I think, Pisces, if you're honest with yourself, you'll realize maybe that there are a lot of things you can do that maybe you haven't been using all your resources, but now you have a chance to really move into gear. So I think that that could be, I think, a very constructive day. And, you know, you don't have to feel that you need to do everything on your own. If you need help and you need advice, it's there. I mean, you don't have to take this help and advice, but it's certainly available for you if that's what you want. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. They are brief. I was hoping to make my forecasts for the 12 signs briefer than usual, and I think I have succeeded. And I now want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 16, which is enthusiasm. So on the surface, this hexagram sounds fine, doesn't it? I mean, it's good to be enthusiastic. You know, we want things to work out and we think the best. But in I Ching world, I don't think enthusiasm is quite as good as it sounds, because enthusiasm on its own, for a start, doesn't achieve anything. You know, we can be as enthusiastic as we like, but that's not necessarily going to change any results. You know, you can see this on YouTube with the presidential election, can't you? You will see videos put out by Democrats talking about how well Kamala is doing in the polls. You're going to have Republicans having videos showing how Trump is completely in the lead. You know, you take your pick. I mean, so if you're a Republican, you can find loads of videos saying your man's going to win. If you're a Democrat, you can do the same thing. But it's just enthusiasm. It's not going to change the result of the election. So enthusiasm is one way of describing this hexagram. And another way, which Greg Winkup in his translation of I Ching uses, he calls it contentment. So contentment has slightly different connotations. It means that we are perhaps complacent and we believe that everything is fine. And we know perhaps that sooner or later things are going to decline, that nothing lasts forever. But does it matter? Let's just live for the moment. Let's be happy and just see what happens. And who knows, something might show up. And that potentially is not a very healthy approach. And we do have the bottom line moving. Now, I don't know whether this is about you or it's about the people around you, but with the bottom line moving, there is a sense in which we are perhaps over-satisfied. We say, everything's fine, everything's great, and we actually want to tell people how happy we are. Or maybe it's not us telling people how happy we are, it's maybe them telling us how happy they are. And there is a real complacency there. And I think that there is a danger here with that approach that, well, for one thing, you're not taken seriously. And for the second thing, if you are proclaiming one's satisfaction, and you know, the I Ching actually talks about people boasting about their connections, I mean, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but maybe some people are doing it. You know, I know some important people. I'm going to be sorted out. Everything is going to be fine. But when people take that complacent attitude, that's often quite hubristic, isn't it? It's setting oneself up for a fall, that things could go wrong very quickly. And so the warning here is, do not be complacent. Do not have any sense of self-satisfaction. However good things might feel, it would be very dangerous. And again, that might not be about you. It might be about some of the people you're interacting with. Listen to what they're talking about. Do they sound oversatisfied? Do they sound overconfident? Are they boasting about how good things are, how good their connections are? If so, then I don't know what to do. And I suppose you can try to persuade them to come down to earth. But maybe they won't listen. What you can do is make sure that you are very realistic about the situation. Enthusiasm is not going anywhere. It's in a way, it's an empty emotion. And do not be complacent. And anyway, we get the bottom line moving. So it moves. And this transitions us to a new hexagram. And the hexagram it transitions to is 51, which is thunderbolts. Or as the Wilhelm translation describes it as, it's the arousing. So in a way, this is perhaps the shock which is kind of promised in the previous hexagram, or at least suggested in the previous hexagram. Being complacent, thinking everything is fine, thinking that we're well connected, thinking we're being looked after, and then suddenly, bang, thunderbolts. There is a shock. And it's about thunder. Though it needn't be such a problem. Thunderbolts is about it is about the shock, but it's also about what we do when there is a shock. It suggests that we are able to keep our cool, that the structures of our life are not in as much danger as we think they are. You know, the first feeling when that shock happens is just panic. What are we going to do? It's a disaster. But actually, life's routines can continue. The cultural routines can continue. We can continue. The I Ching talks about offerings. We can still put incense on the fire. The incense is not going to be spilt. So when that shock happens, it's just important not to panic. And it may be other people's shock, not our shock. And we ourselves are able to keep our cool. And so, overall, it's kind of self-explanatory, this I Ching. I mean, at least one can understand how complacency leads to shock. But, there's a certain justice, I suppose, there. But in this case, when the shock comes, if the shock comes, it's not as bad as it seems. And if we just continue as per normal, as per usual, then I think that things should be fine. But I think the key takeaway from this I Ching is to just do not be complacent. Do not feel that things will look after themselves. Don't think that everything is sorted out. Don't think that you're being looked after. Just prepare for the worst. And if you prepare for the worst, then probably everything's going to be okay. And I now want to look at Jupiter and Saturn in terms of the presidential election. So with Jupiter and Saturn, the idea is that Barbara Waters, in her book Astrology and Judgment of Events, she took the view that the Democrats are ruled by Saturn and the Republicans are ruled by Jupiter. Now, you might feel at first sight that is perhaps somewhat counterintuitive, particularly if you're a Democrat. You might say, well, it's the Republicans that are trying to maybe restrict people. They're the bad guys, maybe. They have these ideas, for example, social conservatism. I mean, that is very Saturnine. And so Jupiter is about, having opportunity and perhaps diversity, and that might be how you see it. But I think you have to actually have a look and consider what Jupiter and Saturn actually are about. And Jupiter is a planet which is, I think it is moralistic. It can be very moralistic. I think in a way Jupiter is a more moralistic planet than Saturn, because Jupiter has clear ideas about the way things should run, and Jupiter has philosophies. Jupiter is a planet about philosophy, and Republicans often have a clear philosophy of what is right, what is wrong. I mean, you could, going back to, Abraham Lincoln being a Republican, slavery is wrong. I mean, that is a Jupiter idea. The free market, in a further iteration of a Republican, you could say the free market, and even the religiousness of the Republicans, which I don't think the Democrats have ever shown, but this religious streak at times in the Republicans' development. I mean, I don't think it's as strong as it used to be, but we don't hear the word moral majority anymore, do we? But the religious idea, which of course helped stimulate the Republicans' opposition to abortion and so forth. I think that is Jupiter, and I think Barbara Waters is absolutely right to give Jupiter to the Republicans. Now, Saturn and the Democrats, I think that also makes sense. And you can again see perhaps the iterations of that. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, Saturn represents the past, and I suppose you could say, well, in the 19th century, before the Civil War, Democrats supporting slavery. I mean, I suppose you might say, well, you want to keep the existing system. But from a social perspective, Saturn is the working man or the working woman. It is the rights, or for example, rights of the unions who tend to support the Democrats, but the working man. If you look at, I looked at Upton Sinclair's chart, and Upton Sinclair was a socialist. He was a Democrat as well, but he seemed to very much encapsulate what Saturn is actually all about. I just want to have a look at Upton Sinclair's chart again. So Upton Sinclair, he wrote The Jungle in 1906, and he was a socialist, and he was very much into workers' rights, and he did stand as a socialist, tried to as the governor of California, and he then I think stood as a socialist. So here's Upton Sinclair's chart, just a reminder of what Saturn can be about. So Upton Sinclair, lifelong socialist, he had Saturn at 29 Pisces, Sun opposition Saturn, and you look at you get a feel for that Sun opposition Saturn there, and so with Upton Sinclair, you do get the idea of the working man, and I think associating Democrats with Saturn, to my mind, makes perfect sense. And so, if that is the case, if you can then associate Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter with the Republicans and Saturn with the Democrats, then you might potentially have a predictive system here, because when you have an election, when Jupiter is strong, you would expect Republicans to win, or at least when Jupiter is stronger than Saturn, and vice versa. So this might be a system for predicting election results. And I just want to have a look at a few elections. By the way, I'm not saying this system works, because there are examples of this system clearly not working. So, let's have a look at an example of an election. So here is the 1860 election, which took place on November the 6th, 1860. And Jupiter is in Leo and Saturn is in Virgo. So what you might then do is say, who's going to win this election? So you might say, well, you consider which planet is stronger than the other. And so that's a kind of a difficult one, isn't it? It's not like either planet really stands out as being strong. But the logic, for example, you might take this kind of logic. You might say, well, Saturn has some dignity here, because Saturn has dignity. Does Saturn have dignity? Well, it probably doesn't have dignity, does it? Because Saturn is in Virgo. Saturn's peregrine. Jupiter doesn't have a great deal of dignity, but it is in a fast sign, and Jupiter rules the fast signs by night. So you could give it. Normally, you give Saturn three. If you take William Lilly in the 17th century, had a point system. So you'd give a planet 3 points for being in triplicity. As we're not going by day or night, we're just taking the day or night doesn't matter. So maybe we'll give Jupiter 1.5 points. So I'm not really saying that this system works fantastically well, but Jupiter perhaps is stronger than Saturn. You might also say that on the day of the election, the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter, and you could say that the moon represents the people. So in astrology, the moon does represent the people. And so on the day of the election, the moon is moving towards a conjunction of Jupiter. And so the people are moving towards the Republican Party, and indeed the Republicans won that election. So another election that the Republicans won was the 1900 election. And so I forget who won in 1900. I think that Theodore Roosevelt was the vice president here, and I think there was an assassination here. But the Republicans won this election. And you can see Jupiter's in Sagittarius. Jupiter is in its own sign in Sagittarius. So Jupiter is well placed. But Saturn is in Capricorn. So this is a kind of a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've got Jupiter in its own sign in Sagittarius and Saturn in its own sign in Capricorn. But because of triplicity as well, Jupiter possibly has extra strength because it's in a fire sign, and it's ruler of the triplicity by night. So perhaps from a points perspective, it makes it across the line. So again, you can see how we're doing this with Jupiter and with Jupiter and Saturn, and just comparing the two. So let's look at some more modern elections. So here is the 1920 election, where Warren Harding won the 1920 election. So the Republicans won this. Jupiter is in Virgo, and Saturn is in Virgo. It seems to be at first sort of neither one nor the other, but then you notice Mercury. So Jupiter is in Virgo, which is Mercury's sign, and Mercury is in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign. So Jupiter and Mercury are in mutual reception, and so that gives Jupiter great dignity, which Saturn doesn't have. And so you can see there why the Republicans might have won that election. And moving forward to Kennedy's election, so this is a day in which this is November the 8th, 1960, when Kennedy won. And this is very clear. Remember, that was a Democrat victory. And so Saturn is in Capricorn, in its own sign. Jupiter is in Capricorn also. So Jupiter is fallen in Capricorn. You can see from that chart that clearly Saturn is in a much stronger position than Jupiter. And indeed, Saturn, as ruler of the Democrats, that was a Democrat victory. And turning to another election, well, this is an election where the system clearly broke, where the system absolutely did not work at all, and that was the 1980 election, where Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter. Now, in this case, the system clearly fails because Saturn is wonderfully placed. Look at Saturn. Saturn, ruler of the Democrats, is in Libra. It's conjunct Venus. Saturn is much stronger than Jupiter. Yet Jimmy Carter lost, and that was that's an example of the system breaking. So I think it's just important, if one's coming up with some kind of system, to give examples of where it doesn't work, and looking at other elections. The 1988 election. So 1988 election, George Bush Sr. was up against Dukakis, and in this case, the Republicans are perhaps in not great shape here, because Jupiter is retrograde in Gemini, and so Jupiter's maybe not in a particularly good position. Saturn is the Republicans. Saturn is the Democrats. Last degree of Sagittarius. I mean, that's still not a brilliant position for Saturn, but both planets have a little bit of dignity, because Jupiter at the beginning of Gemini is in its own terms, using the Egyptian terms, and Saturn in late Sagittarius. I think that Saturn actually is Saturn's not peregrine, because Saturn has face, but Saturn does not have a great deal of dignity either. So this is a planet where probably technically Saturn is slightly stronger than Jupiter, but it's pretty marginal. And indeed, the Republicans did win. So I don't know. That's not a particularly good example of this Jupiter-Saturn system sort of working. Then I suppose the 2000 election. George Bush against Al Gore, and in this case, the Republicans again Jupiter in Gemini. So it's retrograde, but Jupiter does have a certain amount of dignity there because it indicates Jupiter is in its detriment in Gemini, but Jupiter is also in its own terms, using the Egyptian terms. So I suppose that's not so bad. But then look at Saturn. Saturn again is late degrees and retrograde. I mean, I don't think Saturn is in a particularly good position there. I mean, it's not great, and Saturn is retrograde. So I think from an astrological perspective, you see neither Jupiter and Saturn being in a good position, and so maybe if you really look at Jupiter and Saturn, you get some sense that it's really is touch and go. And look at the moon. The moon it does make a sextile to in the end to Saturn, but and it's true that the Democrats won the popular vote in 2000, but it wasn't good enough, was it? So I don't know. Again, that's not a great example of Jupiter and Saturn really working in being able to predict an election result. Then there's Obama's victory in 2008. So here is the chart of Obama's. Is it 2008? Yeah, Obama's 2008 victory, and the Democrats are Saturn and Republicans are Jupiter. So Jupiter is in Capricorn in this chart. So Jupiter is fallen in Capricorn. So that's not good for that's absolutely not good for the Republicans. Having fallen Jupiter in Capricorn. As far as the Democrats are concerned, Saturn's in Virgo. It's not particularly well placed, but it's better than it's better in a better position than say for the Democrats. Now, 2012 election, we clearly see the system not working. So this is when the Democrats won. Now the thing is, this is when Mitt Romney was up against Obama, and so if you take the Republicans as being Jupiter, the thing is that Jupiter is in mutual reception to Mercury, and that really should have helped the Republicans win, but it wasn't good enough. And look at the the Democrats are represented by Saturn 3 degrees Scorpio. I'm not really convinced by that. So I think the 2012 election doesn't fit at all. And again, just a reminder that you can't have a fixed astrological system. Can it really be possible that as soon as you have Democrats and Republicans, that you can predict every election result sort of centuries in advance? Now, the 2016 election, the system worked really very, very well. So in 2016, Jupiter is you take Jupiter for the Republicans. Jupiter is in mutual reception with Venus in Sagittarius. So Jupiter is not too badly placed in Libra, but it's in the sign of Venus. Venus is in Sagittarius, which is the sign of Jupiter. They're in mutual reception, and I would have said that 2016 fits perfectly. And then 2020, getting closer to 2024. So 2024, again, Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter's fallen in Capricorn. It doesn't work very well. Whereas Saturn for the Democrats Saturn is in Capricorn. So in a way, the 2020 election has the same signature as the 1960 election, in which Kennedy got elected. So in the 1960 election, you had Saturn in its own sign, but you had Jupiter fallen, and so Saturn was clearly much stronger than Jupiter, hence the Democrat win. Which takes us to the 2024 election. So can we use this system to predict who's going to win? And one certainly shouldn't use this system in isolation. And so here's the 2024 election. I've set this for 11 p.m., which I suppose is when the results are going to come out. And I don't think this gives us necessarily a clear picture. So the Democrats are Saturn. Forget the houses. I'm just taking the day, just the general day. So if you take Saturn, Saturn is retrograde. It's in Pisces. So what is the condition of Saturn? What is the condition of the Democrats? So Saturn at 12 Pisces, it does not have any. It doesn't have any dignity. It's peregrine. At the moment, Saturn is in mutual reception with Venus by exaltation. So at the moment, things are not necessarily too bad for the Democrats with that Venus-Saturn mutual reception. But by the time of the election, Venus is in Sagittarius. So Saturn is peregrine. Saturn has no dignity here. So that says something about the Democrats. So what about the Republicans? Well, Jupiter is not in a great condition either, because Jupiter is retrograde and it's in Gemini. Remember, Jupiter in Gemini is in its detriment. So that is, to my mind, not looking good. But there is one thing in Jupiter's favour, and that is the fact that Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter. And that does give Jupiter a certain amount of dignity there. Yet, is that going to give Trump the election? Well, in 2012, Jupiter was in Gemini and it was in mutual reception with Mercury, and the Republicans lost. Maybe that was because of Obama's charisma, whatever. So we've got a similar situation here than we do have in 2012. And so that might indicate a Democrat victory, perhaps. But on the other hand, Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is disposed of by Jupiter. So Saturn being in Jupiter's sign means that, literally, Trump perhaps is able to dispose of Kamala Harris. So using this system, I would have said that would give the edge to Donald Trump. But as you've seen with this system doesn't always work. And I just very briefly want to look at the debate chart using this system. So if you look at the debate chart, so this is for tonight, 9:00 p.m. I think it's in Philadelphia. So during the debate chart, looking at the positions of Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn. Well, Jupiter's not retrograde, which certainly helped. But Jupiter is in its detriment. Jupiter is in peregrine. This suggests that, the Republicans are perhaps not in a great state. But also notice in this debate chart, it's kind of dominated by this Jupiter-Saturn square. Jupiter-Saturn square is about the Democrats and Republicans perhaps being at loggerheads with one another. Obviously, I mean, it's an election campaign, but if you look at this this chart, you've got the moon is making a square to Saturn and it's making an opposition to Jupiter. So it's kind of not pleasant, is it? And Saturn is retrograde. So Saturn, to an extent, represents Kamala. But Saturn is in mutual reception by exaltation with Venus. And I do see that as the female candidate. The female Democratic candidate is represented by Venus-Saturn. And there's Venus in Libra, and there's Saturn in Pisces. Now, you could say that Jupiter rules Pisces, so you could say Jupiter still manages to dispose of Saturn, as with the election. But on the other hand, that mutual reception has got to count for something, hasn't it? I mean, it's got to give Kamala some kind of protection, I would have thought. There's so much hype about this debate that, one wonders if it's really going to resolve anything. And a lot of people are thinking this is going to be really decisive. But I don't know. I'm not convinced that this debate is going to be completely decisive. I think there is a lot of clash and tension here, but is it going to settle one side or the other? I'm not convinced. And I just think that with that Venus mutual reception Saturn, at the time of the debate, maybe that will just prevent Kamala Harris from making too many mistakes, and maybe she'll survive it. I think we'll soon find out, won't we? We'll see. And I think if this debate is a good test for that, for this Venus mutual reception Saturn. I'm kind of interested to see how it works, but I would guess with that strong Venus, you've got a female candidate. I think that should help. But just a reminder, 23rd of September, Venus moves into Scorpio. I think it's the 23rd of September, so it goes. Does that affect, is it 23rd of September, I think? Yeah. So whatever the effect, whatever the protection that exists perhaps now, it will go around the 23rd. And I want to finish with the horoscope of Allan Lichtman. Is it Allan Lichtman? I think so. Anyway, so Lichtman is this, I think he's a historian and he's a Democrat supporter, and he has this, apparently he's never been wrong, or he's only once been wrong in terms of predicting the results of presidential elections. I think he says he was wrong in 2000, but even then the Democrats got the highest popular vote. So he's kind of put his neck on the line. He's getting a lot of attention here with his prediction. So if you've made this kind of prediction, he's got his 13 keys, and it's supposed to be very objective. But some of these keys, I think, are open to interpretation. And you can see he's got a sun in Aries, and Lichtman likes to really say what's on his mind. That's Aries. He's quite open with his predictions in the end. I suppose you have to be. Now, being a sun in Aries and having, I suppose, Saturn in Leo, I suppose a far sign sun, means he has a certain sense of intuition, perhaps, of the way things are going. And he's also got planets in Pisces. So Pisces is perhaps got his finger on the pulse in terms of what's happening in America. So the question is, how is he going to feel at the time of the election, and perhaps in the couple of days following? Remember, if he's right, he's going to be interviewed by TV channels and he's going to be congratulated and so forth. If he's wrong, he's still going to have to be interviewed in a couple of days following. That would be really bad, wouldn't it? So what is, in terms of Lichtman, what's going on for him in following the US presidential election? So what kind of astrological aspects is he experiencing? So he is a Pisces. Sorry, he's not a Pisces, but he's got Mars. He's got Mars, Mercury, and Venus in Pisces, and he's got Saturn. Saturn will be at 12 Pisces. So he's just had Saturn. Saturn at the moment is just, well, as at the time of recording this, Saturn has sort of gone over his Mercury. It's interesting that he made this prediction. I think he finally finalized his prediction as Saturn was conjunct his Mercury. I'm wondering about that. Maybe he made a mistake here. You could argue that Saturn hitting his Mercury, and so Saturn will be sort of around his Mercury-Venus midpoint. I mean, not exactly, but I think Saturn will be causing him trouble there. And certainly from a whole sign perspective, he's certainly got Venus, Mercury just in one house. Saturn is in that same house. So I think Saturn could be causing him problems. And then look at Mars. Mars on the day of the election is at 0 degrees 40 Leo. And so in the next couple of days, Mars will be moving towards a conjunction of Saturn. So that is really difficult, isn't it? And then Mars is moving towards his square of his true black moon Lilith. So I don't see a sense of great excitement here. Okay, Uranus has just gone opposition his Jupiter, but I don't see the chart of someone being completely right here. Oh, look at Mercury. Mercury is on his south node, and Mercury is in Sagittarius. So Mercury conjunct the south node might be indicative of someone sort of making a mistake, perhaps, or realizing that they've perhaps gone in the wrong direction. He's got his south node in Sagittarius. South node in Sagittarius, he shouldn't jump to conclusions. And Mercury's crossed his south node. So if I were to predict the result of the election based on Lichtman's chart, I would say, given that he has predicted that the Democrats are going to win, I would have said the Democrats are going to lose. So if you use Lichtman as a way of predicting a result, I would have said that Trump's got it in the bag. That is one approach. But, in terms of what I think, looking at everything, I've looked at lots of different things. I'm of the opinion that Trump is going to win in November. Anyway, those are some views on the election. I hope you found that of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you enjoyed it and you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.